So this last part of this chapter, one of the last learning outcomes of it, talks about BCP, which is Business Continuity Planning. And we generally talk about this when we talk about security. So you'll see this again. The reason we talk about this when we talk about security is because what you're doing with business continuity planning is you're looking at your organization and confirming how, in the case of catastrophe, would you recover. And so what services or what part of your organization need to come up, back up and operating first, and then go from there back. You start that with a strategic plan. So you look at your organizational strategic plan and you determine which assets are most valuable to you and then which processes are most important that you're running. And obviously you don't have your IT people simply sit there and do this. You want your organization to be well represented, all aspects of it. So this can be a discussion. Just as you would when you put your strategic plan together, you want the same kind of involvement throughout your organization when you do your BCP planning. So you start with your strategic plan, then you move into your analysis phase where you look at the different types of threats that are out there, the impacts of the threats to your assets. You look at the scenarios analysis. You look at requirement recovery documents. You do all this and just try to quantify as much as you can. And the reason you quantify it is if you can put some numbers behind your risk assessment, for example, then you have some idea quantitatively of where and how long and what it's costing you when a disaster occurs and how long you can take to get back up and running with a particular asset or service. Then, phase 3 is the design phase where you actually design your plan. So you're looking here at where you're going to store your data. Either you're going to put it in a cold site or a warm site or a hot site. The book talks about those. A hot site is an entire facility that's set up and operating all the time with a complete replication of your infrastructure, or at least those assets and processes that you identified in the analysis phase as critical. For example, if you have an asset or process that is considered so critical that it cannot go down, that it just cannot not be available even in the advent of a disaster, then you would want to host that technology, a replication of it in a hot site that's always running. If there is an opportunity for it to be down without too much impact, or the cost of hosting it in a hot site is simply too much and it's up to the value of the asset that you quantified in step 2, then perhaps you could move it to a cold site where it doesn't have any equipment, or at least you have the facility where you can operate out of in the event of a disaster, and then you just have to get the cold site equipped and then move your data, your backup data over to it and get that asset or process back up and running again. Those are the things that you do in the design phase once you have an idea from step 2, the analysis phase of the criticality of some of your systems and data assets. Then the fourth phase, the implementation phase. This is where you're basically developing and you're testing and you're training the organization how to cut over to this. It's tied very close to the testing phase. So the implementation phase, you're actually going out and you're acquiring those cold sites, those hot sites, setting them up, and in phase 5, the testing phase, you're testing them. And you notice there is a dash line here that moves back over to the design phase, because if there's some kind of hiccup or failure in your testing, you need to go back to the design phase and make sure you've set this up properly, and then go through the implementation and testing over and over again until you finally get it set up right. And this is where a lot of organizations stop. They don't do the testing either enough or effectively enough to really understand once a disaster occurs, such as a Hurricane Katrina or an earthquake or a 9/11 type event, how effective are those systems going to be running at a hot site or warm site or cold site? In the event of those disasters, how well are they going to be operating when everything else is not available, including the public infrastructure that maybe you would have been dependent upon? And then finally, the last phase there is the maintenance phase, where you're simply going back and assessing over and again what you've done to that point. And just like anything else, as it mentions in the book, just like a software development life cycle, SDLC, this type of BCP planning is a continuous thing, and it connects back to the strategic plan where you look at what's important to your organization, because what's important in your strategic plan should be evolving as you compete within an industry. And that will affect obviously everything that you do in BCP planning. This is an interesting graph though, the design graphic here. This is basically showing there's a point in time where the cost to the organization of recovering from a disaster equals the cost to the organization of the unavailability of the IT. And that point in time is the appropriate time to make the recovery occur. So they call the best disaster recovery plan in terms of cost and time is the one that hits that mark right there.